Thank you all for coming today. My name is Devin Edgley. I am the Policy Program Specialist here at the Boulder Chamber. And today is our Transportation Roundtable for 2024. So I'm going to do a brief introduction of the Roundtable and introduce our panelists. So today, the Boulder Transportation Roundtable 2024 is a policy discussion on transportation in our community. We will hear transportation updates from the Boulder community leaders on multimodal transit options, commuter safety, transportation funding, and transit availability. Thank you all for coming. From your right to left, we have Matt Fromer, Transportation and Land Use Policy Manager with Southwest Energy Efficient Project Suite. Mr. Fromer will discuss the potential funding opportunities and policy implementation of SB 24-230, oil and gas production fees. We have Mr. Frank Bruno, Chief Executive Officer at VIA Mobility Services. Mr. Bruno will speak about mobility needs and options in the Boulder area and how private contractors such as VIA are planning to use new funding for local transit services. And then we also have Mr. Carl Geiler, Senior Policy Advisor with the City of Boulder. Mr. Geiler will illustrate the city's approach to integrating the requirements of HB 24-1313, the Housing and Transit-Oriented Communities legislation. We have Ms. Lynn Geisinger, RTD Board Director for District O. Ms. Geisinger will discuss how RTD plans to improve transit service utilizing additional funding from SB 24-230 and work with mandates for transit-oriented development from HB 24-1313. She will also discuss RTD's ballot measure to eliminate the Tabor cap this fall. And then we have our own Boulder Transportation Connections, Ms. Darcy Kitching, Boulder's Transportation Management Organization, TMO, about the extension of the Alternative Transportation Tax Credit through HB 1036, as well as hopes for the future legislation during the interim of 2024. That is our introduction. And so we will go ahead and start with presentations. Mr. Fromer, the clicker is right in front of you. If you would like to stand up here for your presentation and go back to the panel, it's up to you. But
sure.
Okay. All right. Sorry, 1 second, please. I knew it. Okay, perfect. Now they're ready.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt Romer. I work for an organization called SWEEP, primarily on transportation and land use policy. And today we're going to talk about Senate Bill 230, which passed the state legislature, I think on the very last day of session. That was quite speedy. I'm going to unpack this policy. It's 230 has new funding for transit and for lands. I'll cover the lands piece just briefly, but I work on transportation policy, so I'm mostly going to focus on that. So starting with the need, Colorado, we were ranked 42nd in the nation in state support for transit. Now we're up to 23rd place, not bad. But you can see on the bottom there, that's incredibly small font, but that's a ranking in order of states from the most support at the state level in Connecticut, around 73%. Down prior to the bill, Colorado was at 1.1% of basically, if you think about RTD's operating budget, 1% came from the state. And 0% of their operating budget came from the state. So by operating budget, that's the money used for service to keep the buses and trains running. Why do we need to increase funding for public transit? Here are just a few of the reasons that our organizations care about. So addressing air quality and climate change. As a lot of you probably know, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions and also the sector with the largest deficit in meeting the 2025 and 2030 targets. With currently adopted policies, and we have done a lot, we're still gonna get less than half of the way to hitting our 2030 targets. So we've got to do more to cut transportation pollution. And there's no one silver bullet. It's got to be everything: electric vehicles, e-bikes, public transit, efficient land use, everything we know about. The second one, providing affordable transportation options. Just behind housing, transportation is the second highest household expense, and up to a quarter of take-home income for the lowest income Coloradans. Public transit is much cheaper than car ownership. You've got an RTD monthly pass. I think it's $88 a month now, compared to about $1,000 a month, all in for car ownership. So huge cost savings potential, even if you go down from a 2-car household to a 1-car household. So enabling those options for Colorado has huge cost saving benefits. Advancing equity and access to opportunity. We have the share of our population estimated between 20 and 40% of Coloradans who should not, prefer not to drive because they're seniors, adolescents, people with disabilities, or can't afford it. So we need to build a system that works for everyone, and then improving safety. And just from a traffic fatality perspective, public transit is a lot safer than all other modes. Here's a look at RTD and our ridership over the last year. This is weekly data, and I just compared to peer agencies. So this is like Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, San Diego, Salt Lake City. We have been behind for the last year with the purple line, and sort of tanked in the last couple months here because of a few different issues around repairs on the Southeast corridor. But one of them is that we're not providing as much service as we did before the pandemic. And you can see this is the same sort of comparison. This is just for the year 2023. And the percentages that there reflect service as a share of 2019 service levels. So in December of 2023, we were providing 68% of the service we did in December 2019. We have not brought back service quickly enough, and that has really hurt ridership. And part of the problem there is that we haven't had the funding to bring back service more quickly. Okay, now I'm going to get into the bill and what it does. So it creates a new funding source, the first long-term dedicated funding source for local and regional transit in the state, to an existing enterprise that sits at CDOT. It's called the Clean Transit Enterprise. And this enterprise was created by another bill 2 years ago, SB 260. And the existing purpose of that enterprise is basically to replace diesel transit vehicles, so diesel buses with electric buses. I think Boulder might be using some of that money to replace some of the hot diesel buses with electric ones. We have about $8 to $10 million a year for that enterprise. And then what this bill does, Senate Bill 230 that we just passed, is it expands the business purpose of that enterprise to also fund transit service and fund transit capital projects. The fee collection for the transit service part of this enterprise starts at the end of next year. So it should start flowing to RTD kind of Q4 2025 or beginning of 2026. So really faded graph. The estimate in total funding from this bill is about $110 million a year for transit. That will fluctuate because it's tied to the price of oil and gas. And if that gray was a little bit darker on the top graph, you can see the volatility and the price per barrel of oil over the last 10 years. It's kind of all over the place. And then you can see on the bottom sort of the estimated revenue. So for just based on fiscal year 23 prices, that $110 million a year would be more like $206 million a year. 110 is based on the 5-year average, and I'll go into that in a second here. But it could go up as the price of oil goes up, which creates an interesting thing here, right? Price of oil goes up, gas goes up, people need transit, now we're funding transit, so it could work nicely. Here's my best attempt at explaining the breakdown of the funds. So we start at the top with the full oil and gas production fee. Like I mentioned in the beginning, some of that goes to land protection. So that's on the right there, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, $28 million, going to create new state parks, to protect habitats and so forth. On the left there, you can see 80% of the funds goes to the Clean Transit Enterprise. And then within that, there's a breakdown among 3 different funding programs. There's a local transit operations program, which is 70% of the bulk of it, a local transit grant program, and then a rail funding program, 15%. Starting with that first program, so this is a local transit operations program, estimated about $97 million a year, if you're just basing it on the 5-year average. The goals, as stated in the bill, of this fund are to increase transit ridership, reduce vehicle miles traveled, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And number 2, to prioritize communities with high transit propensity, aka communities that are low income, communities of color, have low car ownership, high density, high population densities, people can walk to the bus or train, seniors, etc. Getting into the funding distribution, so the bill does include a few different criteria that the Clean Transit Enterprise Board has to consider when they create the formula, so things like population, share of disproportionate impact to community, transit service. The use of funds, like I mentioned, this is just for transit service, which is great. We haven't had this money in the past, and now we can use it to run buses and trains more frequently. In order for an agency to receive the funds, an agency like RTD, they have to demonstrate how they're going to meet the goals, numbers 1 and 2 listed above. They also have to publish certain information on the website around their budget, their finances, their capital projects, route performance, and accountability. So generally better transparency into the operations of the organization. In terms of eligible entities, can be an RTD, can be a regional transportation authority. It could also be a local government that runs their own transit service. And lastly, I just have a hypothetical. So if RTD represents, let's say, 60% of state transit service and population, maybe it would receive 60% of the funds in this. If all of that went to just running more buses and trains on the system, you can increase service by between 10 and 12%. So good, it's a start. I think advocates like me would rather see like 100% increase, like a doubling of service. But this creates a new funding source, and we can talk about potentially increasing it in the future, tapping other funding sources to improve transit. I also want to show this map of transit propensity, and I listed out a few of the sort of characteristics, communities of color, low income, et cetera. And here's a map we commissioned a study from a consultant last year, where you can see it's kind of a heat map of basically where transit works. Like if you ran 10, 15-minute service, where it would generate the most ridership, and those are sort of the red areas, and you can see Boulder falls in that category because it's got sort of it crosses that population density threshold, it's got a lot of jobs, a lot of movement essentially, as well as some other characteristics. The second program is the local transit grant program. So I should mention the first program, it's a formula fund, automatic distribution. You don't have to apply for the money. The grant program is competitive. And this is where the Clean Transit Enterprise will sort of rank projects against one another based on certain criteria, and the good projects will be awarded money. It's not huge, so 10%, about $14 million a year. Hopefully we can expand this in the future. Critically, this can be spent on basically anything, capital projects, transit operations, also first last mile solutions, so things like bicycle and pedestrian safety projects that connect people to transit are allowable uses of this fund. And then last but not least, this is the third program, a rail funding program, 20% of the total, about $20 million a year. Similar goals, increase transit ridership, reduce vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas emissions. It's also a competitive grant program. And this is really designed to complete the unfinished rail projects we have, particularly in our RTD's fast tracks projects. So I'm sure you're all familiar with Northwest Rail. We also have 2 stations on the N line, the North line up in like Thornton area. There's one down in Highlands Ranch, and then the L station in Denver, unfinished fast tracks projects, as well as other passenger rail projects on the horizon, like Front Range Passenger Rail. They would run from Pueblo through Colorado Springs, and then Denver, Longmont, up into Fort Collins. Mountain Rail, which kind of connects Denver to Steamboat Springs and Winter Park, and then out to like Hayden and Craig, using an existing freight line there. So all of these opportunities to basically match RTV Fast Tracks funds with this new funding opportunity from the Clean Transit Enterprise, and to bring in federal funds hopefully to get those projects built. I just want to look at RTD quickly, and I don't know the actual number that RTD will receive in 2026, but you could say maybe it's between $50 and $70 million. And I just want to kind of put that in context. So RTD's total budget is around 1.25 billion and an $856 million operating budget. And then the last piece I'll mention in the bill is the state legislature directed RTD to basically prioritize the completion of its unfinished fast tracks projects. And they have to submit a report to the legislature by July 1st, 2025, so a year from now, demonstrating how they're going to complete fast tracks by December 31st, 2034, so 10 years from now. Which is ambitious, I would say. I think that's it. Yeah. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I do want to state really quickly, you will find note cards on your chairs. So throughout the presentations, if you have questions, please jot those down. And then after the last presentation for the Q&A portion, those will be collected and we will be categorizing them and reading some of the questions to our panelists. So we'll go to our next panelist, which I believe is going to be Mr. Carl Weiler. Or it's great. No, we're going to do it. Thank you.
Yeah. For attending. This is fabulous, and I want to thank Matt for that presentation because I think you did a really good job of teeing up what I think is the excitement that we can face for the next 5 to 10 years to take a system, Denver metro area, Boulder, Longmont, and really create something that makes a lot more sense than what we've had for the last 25 years or so in terms of really focusing what is regional. I know RTD is spending a lot of time talking about that these days, and I'm sure Lynn is going to touch on that as well. But what does local mean and how do we achieve that? So I want to tell you a little bit about VIA Mobility Services and how Senate Bill 230, I think, is going to help all of us deliver that local service. And again, Matt teed that up. This is our facility out on 63rd and Butte Mill Road. It's only about 3 miles from where we sit right now, just at the base of Belmont Butte and up from Stasio Ball Fields. We've been there for about 13 years, but VIA has been in operation for 45 years as initially as special transit, as a paratransit provider. That was the initial focal point for VIA. And then over the years, we took on contract roles. Even though we are a 501c3, we do earned income contracts that have to be profitable, have to be productive, and have to make sense for all those that we serve. So this notion of the ability to move and the ability to be mobile and independent is something that I think every day we get up and you turn on the water to make coffee or tea, and you expect that water is going to be there. We know that's not the case in all parts of the world, even all parts of the United States. But this notion that we get up and we expect to be able to do the things we're used to doing is vital to who we are. And there are times, whether it's a horrible cold, the flu, or you've broken a bone and you just feel like you're not who you know yourself to be. You feel vulnerable, you feel compromised. And that's what VIA has delivered for 45 years, that ability for people to connect, whether they have to get to the doctor themselves, or they're teaching a class, or they're going to get groceries, that independence. That's something we've been all about for many, many years. We were founded in '79, as I say, 45 years. Some of my former colleagues And we did have an old school bus back in the day. Where do we operate? Well, VM Mobility Services operates in 8 counties currently. So basically from the Denver metropolitan area all the way up to the Wyoming border, and we occasionally take people into Cheyenne for the Veterans Administration Hospital, and folks there are now wanting to come down into Colorado. So our geographic territory is quite dramatic in terms of the areas we serve. We have a news service in Will County. Back when I worked for the city of Fort Collins, we had never envisioned that Will County would be involved in public transit. It just seemed like something that was never going to happen, but they have embraced it in a big way. So we're excited to be doing that. We've been in Larimer for many years, primarily with Estes Park, but now we're looking at the potential to do things with transport in Fort Collins and the Greeley Evans Transit Network. So a lot of potential. But again, this is generally our paratransit operation. So people that need that mobility, that independence, that extra care. It's a door-through-door service, so it's very unique across the country, around the country. But we also provide other services, and this is something that people generally don't know about us. When they see our white or black VIA buses go by, they generally assume you're part of RTD, or you're part of the city, you're part of a county. They don't realize that we're an independent, private, nonprofit provider. And so for years, we've been in the social enterprise business world, which mainly means we look and act like a private business. We have to operate contracts efficiently, effectively. They have to be profitable. And what's the difference? We just simply reinvest that profit back into the operation, into wages and investments that we make in the community, and in terms of buying our equipment and our materials. And wages, of course, is something that's vital. Our largest contracts are the HOP, which is a partnership with the city of Boulder and CU, and RTD is a part of that as well. And FlexRide, as of last July, so a year ago, we took over the entire FlexRide service for the RTD district, and we're delighted to do so. We've operated the HOP since 1994 and FlexRide since the year 2000. So very important connections with the region. This slide, I think, is a good one. I always show this to our new employees when I do orientation for them and our board members. The numbers don't matter. It's just a snapshot in time. But you can operate that left side of the chart, that founding mission service of paratransit, as a standalone nonprofit, bring in some federal dollars, some state, some local donations, and you could operate quite nicely and just have limited amount of service. We chose years ago to go into this social enterprise model and bring on the earned income contracts that enable us to bring in more revenue. When you combine the two pieces, you have a significant amount of money that you can reinvest back into your services, to buy new vehicles, to buy solar panels. And so this is how we basically operate. You can see a list of some of our contracts year to date. Park to Park is one of the ones that we're very, very proud of. The ridership on Park to Park, this is the university parking lot, New Vista parking lot to Chautauqua, operates on the weekends, has just been remarkable. The ridership on the HOP last year was over 700,000 riders. So again, this is very considerable for a small 29 square mile city and region. And again, I mentioned the HOP since 1994. We worked very closely with the city back then to design a system that would make sense, a circulator. This is one of our 3 brand new electric Proterra buses that runs on the HOP, and probably if you stood at the window long enough, you'd see one roll by. And in partnership with the city just put in the order with 7 additional electric buses. They're going to be Gillick buses, which are the same brand as most of the diesel buses that are still rolling around. The average age of transit buses in the country is about 24 years old. So you get anywhere from 500,000–600,000 miles out of these buses, but they're not obviously clean burning by any stretch of the imagination. So our goal is to transform the HOP fleet by 2030 and the rest of our buses by 2035 to either electric or, thinking of hydrogen as battery hydrogen, battery electric as being something that's going to emerge. We're working with New Day Hydrogen now and, trying to see what we can do to advance that. So FlexRide since the year 2000, it's a remarkable service, very effective, and I think connects the region more than people even understand. So we're delighted to be continuing to provide that service for RTD and for our riders. Something that most people don't realize, and we saw this just on last Friday when we saw smoke rising from below the Flatirons, B is a second responder. And during the Martian fire, we were actually in the first response category, driving through flames to get people out of their homes and get them to safety. And this is something that we do voluntarily. We don't get paid to do this. This is one of our many community benefits that VIA can provide. And why do I say that? Well, as a nonprofit public transit provider, it's difficult for us to compete with some of the large providers like a company called Transdev, which is a French-based company, that conglomerate. They could make a decision to come into a market and undercut the market to capture the entire market. We cannot do that, obviously. So when we're bidding, and we have to bid competitively, these are the kinds of things we try to put on the table so communities understand it's not apples and apples. And yet, if you take our community benefit into account, we look pretty good, even as a bottom line. We're very competitive, but we offer a little bit more. Following the King Super shooting, we opened our building to the city and to the law enforcement community and had families of the victims coming in for a couple of weeks to meet with the law enforcement officials and also get services. So this is something that we can do uniquely. Partnerships are vital to all that we do. We have partnerships, as I mentioned, with Weld County and Larimer County. We have new services with Carbon Valley, the communities of Firestone, Frederick, and Dacono. We're working with other communities to see if we can add those. In the year 2020, one of our sister entities, Seniors Resource Center, decided to stop doing paratransit, and that was going to leave a lot of riders in the lurch. And we worked with the Denver Regional Council of Governments, and our board agreed that we would take that on, and we've been providing that service since 2020, so the last 4 years. We have a partnership with Colorado Car Share. They're in our building out on 63rd. And we have a wonderful partnership with Car Share and Commuting Solutions. And we are delighted to be working so closely with the Chamber's Transportation Connections to build a system that I don't think we've seen to this point. So we're very, very pleased about this. This is something that I think is very exciting. So you see our headquarters as it exists today in the white. And we purchased 2 years ago the 4¼ acre site to our north. And you can see the Stasio ball fields just down the hill from us. So this is a site that we have targeted to build a zero emission vehicle maintenance and apprenticeship training center. And we've just completed working with the University of Colorado, the city of Boulder, Boulder County, Boulder Valley Schools, and Excel, kind of the first phase of engineering, which is kind of a fit test to see, can we get all this on the site? The answer is yes. We would cover the site with solar, both the existing site. So imagine 12 acres in East Boulder that would be dedicated to regional transportation for the people of this region. And again, as the region begins to shift to a more local network, this provides a lot of that infrastructure for us to do that. Senate Bill 230, previously as it popped up, it did not include nonprofit public transit providers, and we testified and they made that change. So now we are eligible for that funding, some of that funding. And obviously, as Matt said, we've got to be able to make the case for it. But I think that's what we're going to do together. This is not going to be VIA making the case. This is going to be the region making a case for the local element of transit. So very excited that we have this site from which we can do that. And I just imagine really representing the community in the region very well, both from a sustainability element. We'll have a microgrid that we'll build with these two sites. And I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Bruno. And so up next, we will hear a presentation from Mr. Carl Ballard.
Good afternoon, everyone. Get to the next slide.
Sorry about that.
I'm Carl Geiler. I'm Senior Policy Advisor with the City of Boulder. I work for the Planning Department. I've been basically implementing our land use code for many years now. I started off doing development review with the city and then eventually started working my way into making updates to our land use code, the actual text amendments that you see. So whenever there's a change to the code, we have to bring an ordinance before our planning board and city council. So we're always kind of updating our code, trying to keep it up to date. Most of the time, we're mostly focusing on things that our city council has on our agenda, you know, big work priorities that they set out for us. But this year is a little bit different with all the state mandates. You know, I've been here for quite a while and I've never seen the state get involved in land use or transportation matters that affect our land use code. So it's been a really interesting year. I've been working with Carl Castillo in the audience, particularly on the state bills. So what I'm going to talk about is House Bill 2024-1313. That's been of particular interest to the community. The official name of the bill that was passed is the State Land Use Criteria for Strategic Growth bill. We've been calling it the TOC bill, or Transit Oriented Communities Bill, because there's a subset of that bill that's just called the Housing and Transit Oriented Communities. So some of you, if you've been following this for a while, the state stepped into trying to pass rules that affect local zoning. They did this last year with a bill, and I'm forgetting the name of it now, but it was a very large bill that touched many areas of housing and transportation in cities in communities throughout Colorado. It was, I would say, somewhat overwhelming to monitor and very complicated, and I think it ultimately led to it failing. So what happened is this year, at the request of the governor, they kind of broke it down into, I would say, chewable bites. So we've seen bills that have passed that allow accessory dwelling units, and other bills that relate to housing. This one focuses mostly on transit corridors. So it's a little bit more understandable, but it is kind of complex. So I'll try to walk through the aspects of it. So in a nutshell, it basically requires that cities in metro areas, so basically any cities that are subject to DRCOG, the Denver Regional Government, that a minimum density of 40 dwelling units per acre has to be achieved along transit corridors in around station areas. And that sounds pretty overwhelming at the start, because if you think about it, like in the city of Boulder, you know, we consider high density anything more than, I think it's 14 dwelling units per acre. And some of our largest projects are floating somewhere between 25 and the most might be close to 50 dwelling units per acre. So 40 dwelling units per acre is quite a bit. So I know this has made people raise their eyebrows as to what is being really required here. The map that you can see on the slide is something that the state had produced initially with the project, basically showing bus lines that are of a particular frequency that would create these transit corridor areas. And you can see the area where you have most of the lines is Boulder. So like the previous presentation showed, Boulder, compared to a lot of the suburban areas around Denver, has a lot more bus lines operating at more frequencies, or at least according to the RTD system optimization plan. I know we saw in the presentation that ridership's going down, but there's a hope to bring that back up. So looking forward, the system optimization plan shows these routes as ones that run at least every 15 minutes, at least 8 hours a day for peak service. That's what qualifies them. So obviously the Flatiron Flyer, you know, things like the Dash that go out to Louisville and Lafayette. You have, you know, ones that run on Broadway. Those all create these areas that you call the transit corridor area. And you have to basically map each side of the corridors, it's like a quarter mile from each side of where the bus runs. And you tally up all the acreage of that. And it's a large acreage size because obviously there's a lot of buses that, according to the plan, will be running. So the whole point of this is really to link land use and transportation together. Obviously, the long-term goal is to have better running transit. You know, and in order to have good running transit, you need housing along corridors that make it accessible. People are gonna ride it. So it links the housing requirements with where the buses are gonna run in the future. So what it requires is you tally up your transit corridor area by acreage. So that's a quarter mile on each side of the roadways, and you get an acreage, and you have to determine what they call a housing opportunity goal, or HOG, that we call it. That's not necessarily a great name. But this has been pretty interesting, but complicated to work with. We've been meeting with the state almost on a weekly basis about the progress of the development of the bill, and then when it got, you know, the draft got out there, we're working with them on changes. So we've gained a pretty good understanding of it. So when you tally up that whole transit corridor area, you're not gonna be able to achieve that 40 dwelling units per acre everywhere, because obviously a lot of cities, including Boulder, have a lot of single family areas that are way below that density. But what it does require is that municipalities will have to designate what they call as transit centers. So these are areas within that transit corridor area that would have a density at least 15 dwelling units per acre, which is still, again, for Boulder, pretty high. And you have to tally up all those areas and try to meet that housing opportunity goal. So when you tally up the acreage, it's basically spits out a number, and it's a number of housing units. And each jurisdiction has to show that their zoning can potentially or hypothetically meet that number. So the thing I'm going to keep saying is that it doesn't mean you have to build that number. It doesn't anticipate that all these corridors are going to be built with huge buildings and you have to have those minimum number of units. You just have to make sure that your zoning doesn't stand in the way of that potential number. So I think it aims high so that you can get a good yield of housing in the long term. It also sets up a process where you can't have discretionary review for large housing projects. So it basically says that if there's a large project, anything less than 5 acres in size cannot be discretionary unless the developer or the applicant asks for modifications. So that was something that was a little bit tricky that when we were working with the state on this. The city of Boulder obviously, holds our site review process in high regard, at least to get, high quality projects, but it's also a tool to get more affordable housing. So they were concerned about losing that process and losing that leverage to get affordable housing. So they did make it that, if they come in and they meet their setbacks, they meet their height limit, 3 stories, something like that, it could, and it's under 5 acres, it could actually be done without site review. So we will have to update our code to reflect that, but it doesn't remove the right of an applicant to go, well, I want to build a 4 or 5 story building or build in this setback, then they can elect to go into site review. So it doesn't completely eliminate it. There's other parts of the bill that I will admit that I'm not really as familiar with since I'm the zoning guy. So it doesn't have grant programs that are meant to put money into affordable housing, ways that jurisdictions can compete and get money back to help build more affordable housing or to upgrade infrastructure around transit and neighborhood centers. So there's a good part of the bill that relates to that. Sorry for all the words on here, but there's a lot of details. I think I've covered a lot of this. So again, for transit centers, these are the areas that meet the minimum density of 15 dwelling units per acre. It has to be within a quarter mile of the transit corridor. You can count, there's criteria where you can count a little beyond that if it's in the same zoning district. So there's a lot of nuance to this bill. In those transit centers, you have to achieve that 40 dwelling units per acre. There's also stipulations in there about parking. I think they're trying to get communities to reduce or potentially even eliminate parking in these transit areas to encourage more transit ridership, things like that, but they don't allow you to count subterranean parking unless the parking is less or equal to or less than 0.75 spaces per unit. So it's kind of trying to force cities to reduce their parking requirements as they do this. So that's something that we're gonna have to look at as well as we make updates to our code. There's also potential for jurisdictions to kind of game the system to reach their housing opportunity goal. So like you could make an assumption about the size of units or things like that. So they do require that the average unit size has to be per the American Housing Survey or based on local data that the jurisdiction demonstrates to the state. So they're gonna be like monitoring all these changes that we're doing, and we actually have to report to them on it. So quickly, I'll go through the lower parts of the slide. So there's beyond transit centers, there's also neighborhood centers that's talked about in the bill. These are not areas that count towards your housing opportunity goal, but it might be an opportunity area that in the future might be a transit center. So you can ask for grants to get money to upgrade infrastructure and try to build up areas in the future that might be areas that you could count for your housing opportunity goal in the future. There is a stipulation in there, like if a jurisdiction finds that it doesn't have sufficient water to serve, the densities that are proposed, you can get state approval, for exemptions. So that I talked about some of the grant programs. There's affordable housing and displacement mitigation strategies in the bill. There's concerns about redeveloping areas, and that might be market rate affordable now and push people out. So there's systems in place to try to minimize that. The last part of the slide is the Department of Local Affairs is going to be providing us with maps, guidelines, and strategies to help meet the bill, and also related to the displacement risk assessment. I know the maps they're saying that show the official bus routes that qualify is going to be issued in September, but I think we have a good idea of what the routes are already, but they're going to be providing us with that information. So now I'm going to get to like, how does this impact Boulder? So I try to give you the kind of the foundation of what the bill says. So our housing opportunity goal, or HOG, is quite high, I would say, because we have a lot of buses that meet that criteria. So at face value, it's in a sense kind of shocking what the number is. Like I said, it's aspirational, but what our estimate is at this point is really that map on the right there shows the areas that we've determined are the bus routes that are eligible. So a quarter mile from all those routes. We got an acreage figure of all those. Don't worry too much about the colors. Those are just our zoning districts that we're looking at as possible transit centers. The housing opportunity goal is almost 140,000 units. So just to put that in perspective, the city of Boulder only now has 47,000 dwelling units. So you can see it's very aspirational. But what we found in our analysis is we've made some zoning changes within the last year. If you're familiar with the zoning for affordable housing project, we were asked by our council before this bill even came out to look at some of our commercial areas and neighborhood centers where there were caps on the number of units that could be built based on density requirements, like dwelling units per acre. They asked us to remove those and replace them with just a floor area cap. So not creating a zoning disincentive for providing housing units. And the motivation behind that was really to have more smaller units rather than more larger units, but within the same kind of building envelope. So not necessarily visibly larger. Yes,
I'll keep the microphone. You keep moving out like this.
Oh, sorry. Did you miss all that? So, what do we have to do to fully meet the bill? So that's what I'm going to talk about. What we found in our analysis is that with the changes that we've made is that we're actually very close to meeting the bill. With those changes to the zoning districts that I was talking about, we can get to that 140,000 hypothetically. So I think we can demonstrate to the state that we don't have to make a lot of huge zoning changes to get to this number because those changes are already
in the code. So what we have to do coming up is that the state has asked that we do like a preliminary report in June 2025. We have to submit to them, this is what it looks like in Boulder, this is what we have to do to comply. I think by that time, and after that, we have to start figuring out what we're gonna designate as transit centers. What are those zones that meet that minimum 15 dwelling units per acre? And what are the zones that actually, if you add it all up, meet that housing opportunity goal? We're gonna have to change the code to exempt out discretionary review for those projects that are under 5 acres. We're also contemplating some by right design standards, because if we do have some projects that come in on corridors that aren't subject to discretionary review, we want to kind of avoid those worst case scenarios where there might be a building that's not really designed very well and gets, you know, a lot of community opposition. So that's something that we're looking at. Ultimately, we have to update to meet the bill by the end of 2027. So we do have some time. Like I said, I think we're in good standing for meeting the state law. We don't have to, doesn't look like we have to do anything drastic at this point. So that's where we are. This for saving questions for the end. So
Great, thank you.
that's it.
Okay, and next we will have Ms. Lynn Geisinger.
Thank you, Devin. And thank you very much for having me to the Chamber and Boulder Transportation Connections. And thanks to all of these, all of our speakers in the Chamber and in BTC and City and so many of you for working with RTD most recently on a lot of legislation. There were 5 bills in the session this year that affect RTD and our service, and I'll be mentioning a couple of those, maybe a couple of others that haven't been mentioned. Our lobbyist told me at the beginning of the session in January that several of these would be decided in the last 3 days of the session. I didn't believe her and I went to Europe, and what happened, Carl? At least 2 of them in the last day of the session were the last 2 days, right? There was some controversy there. Mention a couple of others before I talk about the SB 230 and 1313. Another one that passed that is the subject of a number of meetings already, SB 184, which is required that RTD and CDOT and the Front Range Passenger Rail District start working together, continue working together to, and in the very short run, September 30th of this year, to submit a report to the legislature and the governor on how we would structure a plan to move forward with rail from Union Station to Fort Collins, which, you know, hopefully would serve Fast Track's Northwest Rail needs and Front Range Passenger Rail. So those meetings have started, and a number of those with others from the other groups and the governor's office. That bill also created a fund, but expected to put out about $58 million a year for passenger rail, and that's coming from a rail car fee. One other bill that is of interest is RTD this year put into effect, as many of you know, I think, a zero fare program for youth. And it was a pilot. It's been a great pilot. People love it. And so I see people nodding. I know the parents, I hear some people all the time. And we got the legislature in SB 32 methods to increase the use of transit has made, I think, about $5 million available to keep that project going. So funded for next year, I think we will be able, it's an important fund, so keep it going. I guess I was asked to talk about those 2 bills, SB 230 and 1313, and what those mean to RTD. And RTD has been working in the last couple of years off of a system optimization plan, which sort of the national term for that is a comprehensive operations analysis. And there was a process to go through what are our most frequently used, what are our highest ridership routes, what do we need to focus on, and how would we use SB 230 money to move that forward. The current system optimization plan with conversation will be started in September. It expires in 2027, but obviously with money coming forward, we will be looking at that and looking at ridership. It's not a straight direct line from here's more money, here's more ridership. And I think there are kind of two reasons for that. One is the hiring and retention issues that we're having in the people all over the country, transit agencies all over the country and others, as cities and others know. We are making progress. I think in our most recent report, Matt and I were talking about it recently, we've gone from a 20% vacancy rate in our operators to about 11%. So I do expect to start seeing some additional service. One of the problems that you've probably been hearing are dropped runs. So a lot of that initially will be going to dropped runs. I can say that 2 of the routes I've been fighting for, 2 of the 3 that are high priorities at this point, they are going to try and hopefully in January to be bringing back the service that we had pre-pandemic on the ABV airport. And those of you who've been taking it know that it's standing room only a lot of the time, right? In fact, it's standing room only and some people can't even get on to stand. So that is a high priority. It does depend on workforce. The other one is the LX from Longmont into Denver. That is a critical piece. There also will be some service added back on the NB. Still working on the FF4 from Boulder Junction down to the Civic Center. And hopefully, you know, that again, it's a matter of getting the workforce to move that forward. So we will be starting to look at that. We'll be waiting for the CTE, the Clean Transit Enterprise, to give us the eligibility requirements on 230. On HB 21313, there aren't really mandates for RTD, but it will obviously with so much change around the transit centers and a lot of terms to define in terms of the transit centers and potential transit centers and all of that, it will be affected. Our staff has been working closely with the governor's office as they were developing, with the sponsors as they were developing that legislation. About 4 years ago, the board passed an equitable TOD policy that set a target of at least 30% of any property developed on our property, of any developments on our properties would be affordable housing, and it sets target numbers for all of that. So we are moving forward with that. And then one of the things that happened at the last minute was that a piece of a House bill that didn't pass, 1447, was moved into another bill, and what it allows is RTD can sell or lease its property at below fair market value. So that makes it more available to developers who want to develop affordable housing. So that is, we're running a little behind. I'm not going to spend much time. I will take the quick opportunity to thank the Chamber and Boulder Transportation Connections for being among the first of our endorsers for the debrucing petition, the debrucing ballot issue that will be on the ballot in November. And in 1999, the voters, in passing some bond issues, they exempted RTD from the Tabor cap that limits how much a government can take in, and at what point you have to start refunding money. You get the checks from the state, they're $750 or something. RTD will never be refunding anything like that. It would probably be more like $20 or $30, even at the highest amounts we would have to refund. But it could make a big difference in the money we get to keep, including new money that we get to keep. So we have referred that to the ballot, and you will be seeing more about that. It's about $600 million of RTD's overall budget, which is about 600 million. It's 0.6%. It's the base tax of the sales and use tax will be subject to the cap. So I will leave it at that, but we appreciate the support. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Geisinger, and now I will introduce Ms. Darcy Kitchen.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Devin. Appreciate it. I'm gonna go super quickly because we are running a little behind. We want to be sure to have a rich discussion here. So just wanted to let everyone know that the alternative transportation tax credit, which was originally part of House Bill 22-1026, got wrapped into House Bill 24-1036 this year. So it has been extended until January 2027, which is great news for employers because employers can take this tax credit get 30% of the cost back of any alternative transportation incentives that they provide for their workforce. This can be anything from eco passes to bike racks, and showers and all of the things that make it attractive for people to not drive alone to work. Carpooling, vanpooling, all those things. And so there are some limits to that in terms of funding $250,000 per year or up to $2,000 per employee, and that we can help you navigate this process. So please reach out to Boulder Chamber Transportation Connections. Also, the Colorado Clean Commute Program, which is it's administered by the Denver Regional Council of Governments, the Way to Go program, and we administer it here in the city of Boulder as part of our territory. And so it is a pathway to utilizing that 50% tax credit. We help employers actually analyze the commuting patterns of their workforce and present that back to them. So it's a customized data collection process. And we then present them with a trip reduction plan, which helps them plan out which of those investments to make to get the 50% tax credit. So it's a win-win-win, and it's a free process. It's a totally free benefit that you get from just being in our territory. It definitely aids in employee recruitment and retention because it helps you designate your company as a great place to work. I don't know if you saw the seal on your way into the chamber, but the chamber has received Colorado Clean Commute certification, and you get one of those cool window things to put in your business if you do it. And we're so glad that the tax credit was wrapped into another bill this year to really keep this process going and to really support employers in their efforts to incentivize and create more opportunities for sustainable commuting habits. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Now, Devin, do we want to have more of a Q&A before we talk about the TLRC stuff?
Let's do TLRC. Oh no, let's do the Q&A.
Yeah, let's do Q&A. Yay!
Oh, if you have any questions, please pass them over to the far left.
We'll collect cards.
And we will collect cards.
Questions?
I just took notes. I'm going to turn on the light.
All right. Well, hey, thanks everybody for coming here. It's fun to John Terry, President, CEO of the Chamber. Thank you to our panelists. Also, thank you to all the business leaders who are here. Folks from aerospace, coffee shop owners, bankers, mall owners, and a real estate guy who used to work at the chamber. So some of our best leaders here. So thank you guys all for being here. It's really important, actually.
So I'm just going to ask a couple of these questions to our panel today. So let's start with one for Ms. Geisinger. How long will it take to recognize restoration of services to Boulder Junction given the implementation of 1313 and potential windfall of funding from the ERC? That microphone should not be good.
That's it on?
Yes.
Okay. As I mentioned, I'm working on it. And, I think that in terms of just standard scheduling, the FF1 and the FF2 run more or less the same route. And that's part of what they're seeing. What needs to happen though is a recognition that this is one of the most beautiful transit-oriented communities in the area. And I shouldn't say recognition. We're all fighting for services. And So it comes down to, we give it here, then where else do we need it? We go through a very robust Title VI discrimination analysis to make sure that we're meeting our requirements and goals in that sense. So I can't give an answer, but I'm hopeful that we can be moving it forward in this climate, especially where the TOCs are so valued, the transit-oriented communities. I'm hoping we can bring the transit back to our TOC.
Yes. Thank you so much. And I have one for Frank. How would VIA, the nonprofit transit provider, put the new fees to use for the transportation of people in Boulder?
So we would do it in partnership with the communities. When I say communities plural, it would be City of Boulder, Boulder County. And those are our current partners when we're designing things like Park to Park. We do that in concert with one another. So I think we would look at what the needs are along with the city. So take the hop, for example. The City of Boulder has, and I used to be with the city, so this is near and dear to my heart. City has long wanted to expand the reach of the hub. And I'll just give you one good example is the Flatiron Business Park out on 55th. At one point, pre-pandemic, there were 10,000 employees in that park. I know it's not quite there now, despite employment coming back dramatically, yet that's an area that I think would be very beneficial to pick up. So when we start looking at how the actual dollars will flow with a clean transit enterprise, and the actual dollars themselves will have to make the case along with the city for what is desperately needed. And I think something like expansion of the hop, maybe something like a more flexible shuttle route during the all year long, like Park to Park. That wouldn't just be a weekend kind of an operation, but again, it would be based on actual need, not something that the mobility services would just roll forward and say, hey, what do you think of this? It would be based on need that the community has identified, and transportation connections would be a big part of setting up those priorities.
Thank you. I have one for Carl. How does HB 1313 translate to better transportation within Boulder, since density is a prereq for better transit service?
I think with the bill, it's very much a chicken and an egg thing that we were thinking about, and I think that's something that the state legislators had to think about. Do you build the transit first and then do the housing, or do you do the housing first and then hope that the transit responds? And I think it's more in the hands of the state that I think they felt that we had to really beef up corridors with housing and get that on track so that in the future, the transit would start to come up and meet the demand that would eventually happen when the housing gets built. This is very much a long-term vision and project, I think, for communities. We're not talking just a couple of years, so I think that's why it's very aspirational. So I think that's kind of the logic behind it.
Thank you. Let's see, I have one for anyone on the panel that would like to address it. We have received comments from families concerning safety on RTD routes, particularly in North Boulder near the homeless shelter. What is RTD doing to ensure passenger safety? I'm sure that's Philip.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a big issue, and public transit, public libraries, our issues are a reflection, honestly, of the social issues, in our communities. And this shows up, I think, much more in downtown Denver, with the problems we had with Union Station after Civic Center Park closed to camping during the pandemic, and people, kind of moved over there. We have been bulking up our police force, bringing it in-house so we don't have as many contract security people who we've had some problems with in the past. We have also added social workers. I'm not sure how many we have right now. I know the goal was to have 4 or 5 on staff that go out with the police. We're trying to add more people riding, more police and others riding the routes. I actually had not heard we hear a lot about safety. I have not heard a lot about safety issues up in North Boulder, so I'm happy to talk if somebody has a question afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so this one is for Carl. How does HB 24-1313 interact with Boulder Greenbelt?
Boulder Greenbelt.
Open space. and-
Okay, well, I don't know that it interacts with the open space, so directly, other than, when you calculate the transit area to determine the numbers, it does explicitly say that lands that are used as like designated open space or cemeteries or, mobile homes, for instance, do not count in that transit calculation. So I think, is that what the question is getting at?
I think you did a really nice job in answering the question. Okay, let's see. Let's ask this one for anyone who can answer. Is the inline also considered a priority project under SB 24-230? I think that's the first question.
Does Matt want to take one?
Matt, you want to take one?
Sure, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, no, yes, I think the early N line ridership, this is the one that goes north out of Denver into like North Glen, Thornton. And the early ridership numbers are pretty encouraging. They're gonna add 2 stations even further north. So like I said, there's 3 programs in the Clean Transit Enterprise. One is just for rail funding with the hopes of completing those 2 stations.
Can I ask you another question? Yeah, ask you another question. Is there timing to finalize inline from East Lake to Highway 7 in Thornton? Do you know that one?
All the time. I don't know that.
Okay.
No. No, the SB 230s required RTD to prioritize the Northwest Rail and the inline. That was not popular with everybody in the Denver metro area, but RTD is working with those as part of the, it was either 230 or 184, I think it was 184, that required that, and, you know, we would love to get those done, and that's all part of the working process with Front Range Passenger Rail, the governor's office and all of that, but there's no timing right now.
I guess just to throw out a couple more numbers too. So in the RTD fast track savings account right now, I think it's $200 million saved.
Under.
Just under, yeah, growing a little bit every year. The cost just to build Northwest Rail, so to finish the line from Westminster up to Boulder, was 1.5 billion minimum.
Yeah, we're waiting for a peak period Northwest Rail study that will give us other numbers, but yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah, so we need like 10x what we have to finish the rail system. And there's a lot of money from the bipartisan infrastructure law from the Biden administration flowing out to states, so we're trying to get some of that money to Colorado.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask one more question. How does SB 184, Front Range Passenger Rail, serve residents in Thornton, Brighton, etc.?
You know, one of the issues as we work with Front Range Passenger Rail is that at least initially, intercity rail, which is Front Range Passenger Rail, won't be able to stop in Broomfield, probably Louisville or Westminster, and those are stations on Northwest Rail, so that's still something that's being worked out. In terms of some of the areas you mentioned, I think those are more inline. I think the inline would go through those, and so it's one of the rail routes that's been prioritized, and as Matt said, there's money there, there's IIJA money there, although it's going out quickly, but there's a lot of expense. I mean, to get that all done, there will be a ballot issue probably in 2 years for Front Range Passenger.
Thank you.
Yeah. What Lynn said, and then what I would add was, there are a couple of bus rapid transit projects in development in Dr. Cog's long-term transportation plan. So if you're not familiar with bus rapid transit, it's like glorified enhanced bus service with its own lane, so it's nice and speedy, you can cruise past traffic, like a Flatiron Flyer if it had center lane boarding. And they're building several of these right now in Denver, in Colfax, Colorado Boulevard, Federal. I think there's one plan, well, State Highway 119 is one that's funded. I think there's one plan for State Highway 7,
Yeah.
east-west, yeah.
Eventually.
Gene knows, that should, yeah, connect Boulder to the communities to the east, and that will function much like rail, in some cases traveling faster than light rail.
Thank you so much. Please give a hand to all of our panelists. So we're gonna, yes, so we're gonna take the last 10 minutes to have a brainstorming session really quick, but to kick us off, I'm going to introduce those people.
Thank you, Devin. All right, so we want your ideas about how to engage with the Transportation Legislation Review Committee, the TLRC, during their interim session this summer before, the summer and early fall, before the next legislative session. What do you really want to see come up in the legislature next year? And basically, we'll just do like a brainstorming shout out, and I'm gonna write on that pad over there. So think, and I'll come over here. All right. All right. Give me your ideas. What do you think? What do you want to see? What are some policies? What are some stuff you want to see? And I just want to point out this meme from Strong Towns about a transportation system as a means of creating prosperity and never an end unto itself, right? Buses are workforce tools. So anyway, what do you think about how to engage the PLRC this year? I know you got
From anyone, I know you have ideas.
Legislation that kind of I would say puts placeholders in to go after federal opportunities. Like other regions that are doing passenger rails across the country.
Thank you for your input. Any other ideas in the audience? See one up front? Go for it. Go ahead.
I would like the state to start looking at automating transit. Like we have in Morgantown, West Virginia, and other places around the country and around the world. The issues with, getting enough operators has been off and on for at least a decade or two. And automation would handle a lot of that and give us a lower cost alternative to the transit that requires an operator.
Thank you. Mr. President and CEO John Hare.
It's not fair, but I'll put it out there. So I just would like to see more encouragement for local communities to invest in transit. We do a lot of that here, so to see there be some sort of funding mechanism that encourages communities to match the funding that they get from RTD or from the state, rather than just funding projects that for communities that don't necessarily make that kind of investment.
Thank you. Andrea.
I suppose if this Northwest Rail peak hour travel time study comes back positive, and there could be a potential investment to look at the kind of legislation that would preempt the investment into something like that. So to do it, so it could be applied anywhere, but so if we have a project that's ready to go, we can follow that pretty easily.
That's really good. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite capture that. So about Northwest Rail doing, sorry, can you just
Preempt like the conversation so that the funding would be available if that were to come back here.
Okay, great.
Any other ideas in the audience? Yes. Oh, the lady in the back row, and then I'll come back to you. Thank you.
So I know that at one point in the legislative season, this past legislative season, there was conversation about creating additional dollars for safety projects, making zero projects, doing something like a fee based on the weight of vehicles, and that if didn't end up moving forward. But I think it would be good for the legislature this session to have additional ideas or creative ways to assess, assess vehicles by weight, because we know that the heavier the vehicle, the more damage is caused to people in terms of bodily injury. So I think revisiting that would be important. I know that some of the money was just sort of shifted around in the state Division 0 projects, but the new money is so important because our roads are just getting more dangerous. Right. Here.
Thank you. 1 second, I have this,
Funding for the repair program.
I'm second that.
Funding for the ozone free repair program, but we lost that funding from them. This past legislation, I mean, not what, the funding was designated for 2 years.
Right, so all we have now is zero fare for youth. We don't have the free bus for everyone during the summer, during the ozone season.
Okay, and then I think we can end with Mr. Bruno in front.
Thank you, Devin. So I just wanted to pick up on Jean's comment about Vision Zero. And I would suggest that the funding maybe ought to be also include further enforcement, because I think that's a little frustrating that we see signs all over the communities, you know, Vision 0 and 20. And I know a lot of people don't have a clue what that means. But enforcement is really a problem. Without enforcement, I know that's just, you know, it's the rubber in the road, quite frankly, but it just doesn't mean as much if we're not enforcing it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I would add more kind of community marketing and messaging dollars for what Vision Zero actually is, and making that really approachable and accessible. I think a lot of people are really confused by that term and what it really means, and some people are starting to get a little worried about it. So, I mean, this could go along with what Jean said about additional funding, but
Funded by enforcement.
yeah.
There you go. So I see that's good.
So in regards to the safety issue that was brought up, what could legislation look at in regards to how we could bring that level to public transportation? I think we're gonna actually talk about,
Do you mean personal safety?
Yeah.
On buses and trains?
well, and you know, staff safety as well, because there's probably opportunity there for staff to not feel safe.
Well, exactly. That's something that has come up to us as well, is this idea that operators who are threatened have to pull over, get everyone off the bus, and it makes it really, you know, then it's a lose-lose for everybody.
I've been up with us where that happened, and it's, can legislation look at that at any level?
There has been discussion of legislation that apparently a couple of years ago, the legislature made a whole slew of simple assaults misdemeanors, and I know that in hospitals, they wanted to change that back, and some of our staff and our CEO would like to see that change for, you know, for people who are working, our operators, people in hospitals, things like that. So it would be controversial. We don't know who would carry it, but that's one of the things they talked about.
I mean, yeah, if this is a brainstorming opportunity, that would be a huge thing to bring up.
Yeah. What types, I mean, that's something we can bring up with TLRC, is what types of legislation could be possible to increase transit safety. Yeah. Great, especially for young people and students and people who are dependent on us. Yeah.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Yay, look at that. Right on.
Okay.
Oh, one more.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on the safety aspect that when we saw driver behavior change a lot during the pandemic, and now there's been a normalization of running red lights and speed limits, and so anything that could augment that message and to more stigmatize than normalize it, because I spend a lot of time on a bike or walking on the road, but it's terrifying sometimes. I mean, somebody literally drove 50 miles an hour through this intersection one day, where I was out there, like,
So we have to make people more conscious about why that safety means something for everybody. Yeah.
My son and I had a conversation about this yesterday. We were waiting at a red light, red arrow for a left turn, and the person in front of us just decided to go, but there was nobody coming. And he said, "Oh, that person just ran around." And he said, "Yes, some people just don't think the law applies to them." So,
And I'd actually add one more. It keeps you more and more that right on red is not a good policy. It's actually creating a lot more safety issues for cyclists especially. So we're adding more and more intersections within Boulder that prohibit that, but I think it's something as a state we could actually revisit.
cool. These are great ideas. Thanks, everybody. We can bring this to Taylor and see this interim session and start to advance some ideas and representing our community's concerns. So thank you so much. Really appreciate being here and being part of the conversation. And thanks to all of our panelists, as Devin said. This is good. Thank you. Feel free to hang out. We'll have some snacks.
So,
If I can get together in front of the screen here. If I get
I do.
Darcy, could you move in?
Yeah.